Welcome to the Inner Ascent. In today's episode, we dive into the fascinating world of Noetics, the science and philosophy of conscious insight, and explore one of the most ambitious experiments ever conducted on the nature of collective awareness, the Global Consciousness Project. We'll look at the roots of Noetics in the idea of nous, the deeper mind that perceives truth beyond ordinary thought. Then we move into modern theories like noetic field theory, which proposes that consciousness is not a byproduct of the brain, but a fundamental, quantifiable field of reality. From there, we examine the extraordinary data of the Global Consciousness Project, a worldwide network of quantum random number generators that, for more than 15 years, appeared to respond to major global events, moments of collective emotion, and even precursor signals before certain unexpected events. Whether these results reflect a global mind, a non-local information field, or something entirely different, they open profound questions about the interconnectedness of human consciousness. So take a breath, settle in, and join me on this ascent into the deeper layers of awareness. This is Episode 18, Noetics and the Global Consciousness Project.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we tackle the densest, most challenging ideas in the universe, providing you with a mental shortcut to what's truly new and surprising in science.
And today, we're definitely doing that.
We are. Today, we aren't just discussing theories. We are, I think, fundamentally challenging the architecture of reality itself.
That's absolutely right. Our mission today is a bit of a conceptual high-wire act. We're looking at a proposition so radical it tries to upend the foundational assumptions of both modern physics and, neuroscience.
Yeah. And the claim is?
The claim is that consciousness isn't just a localized phenomenon, something generated solely by the, 3 pounds of gray matter in your skull.
Right.
Instead, it's a fundamental quantifiable field that spans the entire cosmos.
A field, like gravity or electromagnetism. And we have a phenomenal stack of source material to get into for this.
We do.
On one side, we have these incredibly technical, theoretical physics papers. They're proposing a radical unified theory of mind called noetic field theory, or NFT.
And this theory is actually trying to define the particles of consciousness, to quantize thought itself.
To quantize thought. And then on the other side, we have the hard empirical data.
Exactly. We're talking about nearly 2 decades of continuous real-time measurements from a worldwide experiment, the Global Consciousness Project, or GCP.
And this project, it had a whole network of devices all over the globe, right? Specifically designed to measure this alleged field during moments of intense, shared human emotion.
It's the one.
So here are the stakes for this deep dive. Can we bypass that perennial philosophical impasse, the hard problem of consciousness, by just defining the mind as a quantifiable physical metric?
And maybe more critically, does 17 years of empirical data prove with overwhelming statistical certainty that our global emotions can literally introduce order into the quantum structure of reality?
There's a lot of ground to cover. Let's unpack this. So we have to start with the philosophy of mind, don't we? Because NFT, this noetic field theory, it's really a direct challenge to the mainstream scientific view.
We absolutely must. It's first and foremost a challenge to the prevailing materialist viewpoint of science.
And that view, just to state it simply, is basically the assumption that consciousness emerges from the brain's complexity.
Right. Your brain is this incredible supercomputer, and consciousness is just the software it's running.
It's a product of the hardware.
Exactly. NFT argues that this widely accepted premise that consciousness is something caused by the brain is a fundamental philosophical category error.
A category error.
Yeah, there's no actual proof that awareness arises from complex material systems. It's just a long-standing, very powerful assumption. The question itself, what processes in the brain create consciousness? It already presupposes the answer.
That's the problem David Chalmers called the hard problem.
Yeah.
Right? How does all that electrical firing of neurons, how does that produce the subjective experience of seeing the color red or feeling pain?
Right. You look at the brain chemistry, you just see chemistry, you don't see the feeling.
So how does NFT get around this?
It basically views the hard problem as trivial, or maybe even non-existent. It just shifts the entire paradigm.
How so?
NFT posits that awareness is made up of of primary base states. Think of them like information or pure potential. They exist fundamentally in the universe, and they interact with the brain's dynamics. They don't emerge from them.
So the brain is more of a receiver than a generator.
That's a good way to put it. And to set up that interaction, the theory actually goes all the way back to Descartes.
The famous Cartesian dualism.
Yeah.
You've got the mind, res cogitans, which is immaterial, and then the brain and body, res extensa, which is the material stuff.
Right. And NFT sort of corrects Descartes. It argues that the mind, the res cogitans, is not some abstract, ghostly, immaterial thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's a physically quantifiable metric, a real physical field that intrinsically interacts with the material brain.
So it's still a kind of dualism, but both sides are physical now, or at least quantifiable.
Exactly. It's an interactionist approach, but the mind half is now tangible, at least in theory. The ghost in the machine is no longer a ghost. It's a specific kind of physical force that the machine interacts with.
So what does this physical force, this field, what does it look like structurally? Can you give us this sort of cosmological map of an individual's consciousness?
The structure is pretty complex. It starts with this idea that individual intelligence arises from what's called a teleological noumenon.
Okay, that's a mouthful. Break that down.
Sure. Teleological just means it has a purpose, it's goal-oriented, and noumenon is this idea of an ultimate reality, the thing in itself. So it's an ultimate reality or organizing principle that has purpose and structure.
And this purpose-driven reality, it forms something.
It forms a hyperstructure they call the psychosphere.
The psychosphere, wait a minute, is that sort of like a data cloud for your entire conscious existence? Your own personal universe?
That's a perfect analogy. Yeah. Think of the psychosphere as the complete physical domain for every single event of an individual consciousness, all your past memories, your present awareness, even your future intentions.
Wow.
And the psychosphere, according to NFT, it involves this dynamic interaction across 3 essential base states or domains.
3 domains. Okay, lay them out for us.
First, you have the local matter field. This is pretty straightforward. It's confined to the physical brain itself. It's what the neuroscientist Karl Pribram called the brain holoscape.
The holographic information structure inside your head.
Exactly, the local stuff. Second, there's a complementary non-local noetic field. Now, this field is non-physical in the way we usually think of it. It originates in what they call noetic space, which has these singularities of elemental intelligence.
So that's the source of pure extended awareness, the cosmic part.
That's the cosmic part. And then third, you need something to connect the two, a cosmological ordering principle. It's a universal mediator that links your local bounded brain to that infinite non-local field.
This is bringing us back to the density of the theory. How do you take this abstract psychosphere hyperstructure and turn it into something you can actually quantify, something you could, in theory, measure in grams or joules?
And that is the absolute core claim of NFT, the quantization of mind.
Like quantizing energy?
Precisely. Just as Max Planck discovered that energy isn't continuous but comes in these discrete little packets called quanta, NFT argues that mind must also be quantized. It must come in packets.
And what's the mechanism for that? How do you package a thought?
The mechanism is called the bosonization of a theoretical unit that the neurophysiologist Sir John Eccles came up with. He called it the psychon, his unit of mental intention.
Bosonization, making it a force-carrying particle. So we're literally turning a thought into something like a particle.
We are recasting the mind as a material, force-mediating entity instead of just some abstract entity state. And to do that, you have to extend our current quantum theory.
So if we're doing that, what are these fundamental particles of consciousness? What are we dealing with?
There are 2 main quantum elements that define this whole system. The first is the psychon, which is also called the noeon.
The noeon.
This is defined as the fundamental quantized gravitational boson of consciousness. The noeon is what mediates that non-local noetic field. It's the particle of your intention.
Okay, the particle of intention. What's the second element?
The second is the corticon. Now, the corticon is a quantum of the water rotational field. It's the mechanism that physically mediates all the interactions within the brain, and it's governed by something called quantum brain dynamics, or QBD.
Wait, you just jumped from conscious intention straight to gravity. A gravitational boson. Why does NFT need to extend standard quantum theory to include microgravity? That seems like a massive leap.
It's a huge leap, but it's a necessary one. If the mind is a fundamental universal force, it has to be integrated into the unified field theory of physics, and that ultimately has to include gravity.
I see.
So NFT describes the non-local noeon as a confined graviton of this unified non-local noetic field.
A confined graviton.
Yeah.
That is a huge claim. How would that even connect consciousness to physical action in the brain?
The connection happens by coupling that noeon to the brain's quantum dynamics, the QBD. The theory suggests that pure mental activity, pure intentionality, it happens at the Planck scale hypercavity.
A ridiculously small quantum region.
Unimaginably small, and activity there is considered frictionless.
Frictionless. What does that mean in this context?
Yeah, think of it like a mental superconductor. You know how in a superconductor, electrical current moves with zero resistance?
Right.
It's a similar idea. NFT posits that in this quantum cavity, intentional mental activity requires no gravitational work for it to evolve from one state to another.
So thinking is effortless at a fundamental physical level.
It's a fundamental, cost-free mechanism of thought. And this is the entry point of intentional action, of free will.
That makes the concept of free will very non-trivial.
Yeah.
I mean, if our intentions are mediated by these noeons, these confined gravitons, doesn't that imply that free will is just a physical gravitational process? How free can it really be?
That's a critical philosophical distinction. And the theory tries to avoid strict determinism by bringing in concepts like quantum potential and non-computability, which we can get into.
Okay.
But fundamentally, it integrates intentional action by extending the work of the physicist David Bohm.
Bohm's quantum potential, the idea of a non-local pilot wave that guides particles.
Correct. Bohm's potential is informational and it's non-local. NFT takes that potential and extends it into a teleology, a purpose-driven system that includes a non-local conscious process.
So that's the crucial entry point for intentional action.
That's the entry point. The noeon, this particle, it acts as a phase regulator. It modulates the probability landscape of the brain's coherent quantum states.
So just to be clear, the noeon isn't creating the thought from scratch.
No.
It's more like it's tuning the probability of which thought or which action is going to manifest physically.
Exactly. It's the physical realization of the act of intending. It's what connects that cosmic psychosphere to your individual biological hardware.
Okay, we've established the theory behind the quantum particle of consciousness, the noeon. That's the intention part. Now let's try to ground this in the actual mechanics of the brain. You mentioned the corticon and quantum brain dynamics, or QBD.
Right. QBD is the quantum field theory that describes the biological systems of the brain. And the corticon is really the key here.
Which is the quantum of the water rotational field.
Exactly. The corticons interact with electric dipole oscillations all along the protein structures in the brain. And it's the synchronization between that water quantum and the electromagnetic field that manifests long-range order and coherence across the brain.
QBD sounds like a really robust model for complex computation. But why is it insufficient on its own to explain consciousness, according to this theory?
Because QBD by itself is a linear closed system. It can describe incredibly sophisticated neuromolecular computation, but it has no room for free will or intentionality.
It's like a supercomputer that it only runs its programming.
It's a perfect analogy. It only executes what it was programmed to do. If consciousness is truly capable of novel, non-programmed, intentional input, which is, the very definition of free will, then QBD needs an outside nonlinear extension.
And that's where the noetic field, mediated by the noeons, comes in to provide that nonlinear kick.
Correct. The noetic field provides the causal input. It effectively gives that closed QBD system the degree of freedom it needs for rational, intentional input.
This brings us to a part of the theory that seems, almost counterintuitive, especially given how much focus is usually on neurotransmitters and proteins.
Yeah.
And that's the role of water.
Yes.
I mean, water was historically just dismissed as background filler, right? Even though it makes up 80% of our brain cells.
It was a huge oversight. NFT and QBD really highlight that ordered water is the essential synchronization backbone for all the quantum dynamics of consciousness. The water molecules in the brain, they're not just some inert fluid. Their dipoles oscillate in a highly organized, coherent way.
How does this ordered water physically enable the mechanism of consciousness? What's it doing?
It serves three really crucial structural functions. First, it acts as a buffer for phase transitions. It basically provides the stability for the brain to switch seamlessly between different coherence states.
Okay.
Second, it helps maintain coherence effects across the whole brain. It sort of keeps the signal clean by directionally quenching periodic moments. And third, and this is maybe the most important part,
Right.
It translates the microscopic quantum operators, the Hamiltonian, into long-range macroscopic correlations across wide areas of the brain. It's the medium for long-range communication.
So the water is acting like a unified antenna system for the entire brain.
Precisely. And this is all closely associated with structures like microtubules, those tiny cylinders inside neurons, which other theories, like the Penrose-Hameroff-Orch or OR theory, have also pointed to as sites for quantum coherence.
So what happens inside those microtubules with this ordered water?
Well, because of the geometry inside a microtubule, the Casimir radius is large enough that this ordered water state might actually undergo something called Bose condensation.
Bose condensation. Could you simplify that for us?
Certainly. Think of it like a massive group of individual particles that suddenly decide to stop behaving as individuals and start acting as a single unified wave, a superfluid.
They all lockstep.
They all lockstep. They enter the lowest available energy state and become indistinguishable from each other. In the brain, this Bose condensation of ordered water provides a continuous, coherent, stable basis for one aspect of consciousness.
And this coherence is carried by something.
It's carried by Froelich waves. They oscillate at these incredibly high frequencies. We're talking hundreds of billions to 1 trillion hertz. And they propagate these coherent states, exchanging energy with the electromagnetic field. This collective mode is believed to be the physical basis for continuous, non-local awareness.
Okay, so the noetic field sends the intentional command via the nuions, which then interfaces with the brain via the corticons, which are mediated by this Bose-condensed ordered water system.
That's the physical connection.
Which leads us to what the theory calls the noetic effect, the actual entry point.
The noetic effect is the phase regulator. Since intentionality is nonlinear and a causal, you can't describe it just by solving the linear Schrödinger equation, which governs most of quantum evolution. It has to get around the uncertainty principle.
How does it do that?
It does that by invoking synchronicity through non-computability.
Synchronicity, that's Carl Jung's term, of course, for meaningful coincidence and a causal connection. This is the link to the collective unconscious.
Exactly. NFT is effectively providing a physical, albeit a quantum physical basis for Jung's idea of synchronicity and the archetypes of the collective unconscious. This is something the physicist Wolfgang Pauli and Jung himself tried to formalize for decades.
So the noetic effect is this synchronicity in action.
It acts as a subtle causal operator on Bohm's potential. It provides phase control to specific coherent states, those Froelich waves in the brain, allowing your intentional action to finally manifest.
This is getting extraordinarily theoretical. If this theory is even remotely true, and we can physically quantize the mind and control its phase states, what are the practical applied consequences? And that's where quantum cerebroscopy, QC, comes in.
That QC is applied NFT, yes. The theory claims that by perfecting this Bosonization of Descartes' res cogitans, we can create instruments capable of actually accessing the non-local conscious process.
Wow.
QC aims to evanesce, to bring into detectable existence these non-local conscious processes into the core of a cerebroscopic transducer.
And it does this using
Highly precise, tunable, laser phase control interferometry.
Wait a minute. Brain TV. Our sources explicitly mention telecerebroscopy. I mean, how rigorous are these claims? Is this just pure science fiction?
It is certainly the most ambitious and speculative claim to come out of NFT. The rigor is all theoretical at this point. It's based on the assumption that if the noeon is a measurable, confined graviton, then a sensitive enough device should be able to measure the tiny gravitational work associated with that intentional field.
Or the lack of work, given the frictionless claim.
Right. If the mind is a measurable field, then technologies could eventually evolve to convert that field's information into sensory data.
So the practical applications could include sensory bypass technologies, maybe for vision or hearing, and then the holy grail of brain TV. The theory gives us a roadmap, but the technology is still way out there.
Correct. The philosophical foundation is strong in the sense that if the mind is a physical entity, it can be measured. But the technological hurdles, specifically the precision you'd need for that kind of laser interferometry at the Planck scale, are obviously immense.
Okay, so we've built this incredible theoretical framework. Yeah. The noetic field, the noeon, this concept of non-local intentionality. Now, we have to shift gears and get to the empirical data.
We do.
Because while NFT provides the why, the Global Consciousness Project, the GCP, provides with a measurable macroscopic effect of a collective, non-local mind.
This transition is so crucial because if consciousness is non-local for an individual, and the early work at the Peer Lab suggested it was, then that non-locality should scale up. It should apply to the whole planet.
Right.
The GCP, the Princeton Egg Project, was the big attempt to prove that scaling.
Let's start with that foundational work at the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, PEER. What did they actually establish that even made a global project seem possible?
Well, Peer spent decades testing mind-matter interaction. Their main tool was the Random Event Generator, or RG. These are devices that produce sequences of numbers based on genuine quantum processes, like electron tunneling.
So the output is fundamentally unpredictable.
Totally unpredictable. And Peer research established two highly significant facts. First, that an individual's consciousness, their intention, could actually influence the distribution of these random numbers.
And the second finding was the real kicker, the one that links directly to this noetic field concept.
Absolutely. The effects were definitively non-local. It wasn't just that intention could influence the REG when you were sitting next to it.
Right.
Researchers found success in remote experiments when the subjects were hundreds of miles away from the device, and even more baffling, they found effects when subjects tried to influence the data off-time.
Off-time, meaning
They aimed their intention at data that was either recorded in the past or would be recorded in the future,
wow.
which strongly suggested that the mind, or this intentional field, was not confined spatially or temporally to the brain.
So if an individual can influence randomness remotely, and even through time, the next logical step is to see if a group can do it.
Yes, the field Regis studies. They discovered that when groups achieve some kind of emotional or cognitive coherence, like people attending a deep ritual or a dramatic opera or a concert, the RUG data produce these measurable deviations from randomness.
But not in chaotic environments.
Exactly. When they put the RG in a busy shopping center, the data stayed purely random. Coherence was the key variable.
And this led the researcher Roger Nelson to hypothesize that if a theater full of people works, what happens when billions of people are all focused on the same thing at the same time?
That was the inspiration for the GCP. And it ties into this older concept of the noosphere, this idea of a global mind layer, conceived by Teilhard de Chardin. The GCP was trying to measure faint indications of this noosphere becoming active.
Okay, so let's get into the methodology of GCP 1.0, which ran for 17 years. What did this global consciousness detector actually look like?
It was a world-spanning network. At its peak, it had up to 70 highly validated commercial-grade random number generators, and they were placed in different time zones all over the world, running continuously 24/7.
And their randomness, again, came from a true quantum source.
Yes, electron tunneling. This ensures the numbers were genuinely unpredictable, not just pseudorandom from a computer algorithm.
And the hypothesis was simple. Big global events that grab the attention and emotions of millions of people should correlate with statistically significant departures from randomness.
Precisely. And the primary measure wasn't just how one device deviated, but network variance, or network coherence.
Meaning
Meaning it measures how much all these globally separated independent devices start to synchronize or correlate with each other. The idea is, if mass consciousness is a non-local field, it should affect the entire network at once, no matter where the devices are.
Now, to guard against the obvious critique of just, data fishing or finding patterns after the fact, the GCP used a very rigorous pre-registered protocol.
This is why the result is so powerful. This is so important. Over 17 years, they accumulated 500 formal pre-registered events. Before an event even happened, the researchers would publicly log its exact nature, the precise start time, and the end time.
And only then was the data for that specific window analyzed.
Exactly. It eliminates any possibility of a posteriori selection or cherry-picking the data.
Okay, let's get to it. The robust bottom line. After those 500 pre-registered events, what was the final verdict on global consciousness influencing reality?
The accumulated departure from expectation across those 500 events. It confirmed the core hypothesis with what you can only call breathtaking statistical significance. The resulting z-score was 7.31.
The z-score of 7.31, just to put that into perspective for you, a standard scientific discovery, say in particle physics, is often declared significant at a 5 sigma level. So what does a 7.31 sigma result translate to in terms of odds?
It corresponds to odds of about 3 trillion to 1 against the effect being just a random chance fluctuation.
3 trillion to 1.
The network showed this consistent, subtle trend of becoming non-random whenever global attention was focused. The sheer quantity and rigor of the data have moved this from being just some weird anomaly into a genuinely robust scientific phenomenon that demands an explanation.
Let's drill down into some of the event examples, starting with maybe the most profound negative coherence event. The September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks.
That event provided the clearest, most dramatic example of global emotional synchronicity. Not only did it show a massive, statistically significant deviation from randomness, but that effect, it persisted for days afterward.
And there was something else, right, during the actual moments of impact.
There was. When researchers looked at the data during the precise moments the planes hit the towers, they found an extremely strong, anomalous increase in the autocorrelations of the data.
Autocorrelation. That means that one data point is somehow related to the next one, even though they should be totally independent.
Exactly. A true random sequence has zero autocorrelation. Each bit is independent of the last. But during 9/11, that independence it broke down dramatically. The data became predictable based on its immediate past.
One of the researchers described it as
almost as though time itself became sticky. That's the quote. The quantum field appeared to lose its capacity for full randomness in response to that profound collective shock.
What about on the other side? Positive coherence, the synchronicity of shared positive emotion.
New Year's Eve celebrations provided the most consistent positive result. As billions of people around the world simultaneously focus on the moment of midnight, the data consistently forms this distinctive V-shaped curve.
The V-shape.
Yeah. The network variance decreases, meaning the devices become more coherent and less random, and it reaches its lowest point, its maximum coherence, precisely at midnight, and then it swiftly returns to a normal random baseline. It's a clear, repeatable, and temporally locked response.
We did note earlier that some events, like big competitive sporting events, the World Series, the World Cup, they often show unreliable or even null results. Why would that be?
The theory is that the coherence effect requires a shared intention or emotion. Competitive events, while they're very engaging, they involve radically conflicting intentions. One half of the global audience intensely desires one outcome, and the other half desires the exact opposite. That opposing mental state just cancels out the coherence effect that the network registers, and you get a flat, random outcome. The key seems to be synchronous and harmonious emotional engagement. So, given that 7 sigma robustness of the finding, the scientific community is now forced to choose between models. The debate is no longer if the effect exists, but why it occurs. And this has led to 2 primary explanatory frameworks.
Okay, let's lay out the debate. Is it a true, genuine global field, or is the data being subtly influenced by the human researchers themselves?
Right. The first model is the information field, IF model. This is the one favored by the GCP founder, Roger Nelson. This model maintains that a genuinely non-local information field, which is sourced in our coherent mass consciousness, directly influences the output of all those widely separated devices.
And that model is?
It's capacious. It explains the main result, the 7 sigma finding, and it also explains all the secondary correlations, like the stock market connection we're about to discuss.
Okay, so what's the competing model? The more skeptical one.
The competing model is the experimenter effect, EE model.
The experimenter effect.
The EE model, which was put forth by analysts like Peter Bansal, suggests the effect is still psi-mediated, but it's limited to the experimenters themselves.
So it's not a global field, it's the researchers. How would that work?
It posits that the researchers unconsciously used precognition to select the start and end times of events that just happen to capture natural massive deviations that were already occurring in the data stream anyway.
So they aren't influencing the data globally, they're just precognitively picking out the existing anomalies.
Exactly. It's still a highly non-materialist explanation. It requires psychic ability, right? But it tries to localize the mechanism to just the human observers running the experiment, rather than a generalized global field.
It's an internal skeptical critique, but one that still has to acknowledge psi is real.
It does. However, the accumulated evidence goes far beyond just those 500 formal events, and it provides really powerful support for the global field model over this more localized EE model.
What independent analyses are we talking about? Let's start with the entropy analysis that was conducted by Dean Radin.
Okay, so Radin used a standard tool for analyzing biological complexity called multiscale entropy, or MSE, and he applied it to the entire 23-year database, ignoring the pre-selected events completely.
So if the experimenter effect model was correct, The data should just look purely random everywhere except around those 500 chosen event boundaries.
That's right. But that's not what he found.
What did he find in that overall random tapestry?
He found widespread negentropy, a reduction of randomness, the emergence of structure and complexity that was distributed throughout the entire dataset, not just during the formal events.
So there's a constant low-level ordering effect happening.
Exactly. This negentropy suggests a general, persistent relationship between consciousness and the ordering of entropy, regardless of whether a major event was selected. It strongly refutes the EE model because the structure is continuous, which supports a persistent field influence.
That is compelling. It suggests the field is always active, not just turning on for disasters. Now, another highly persuasive piece of evidence came from applying techniques from neuroscience.
Yes, the evoked response potential ERP analysis. ERPs are used to measure how the brain reacts to a sensory stimulus. They show a characteristic positive-negative deflection pattern in response to stimuli.
And researchers applied these signal extraction procedures to the GCP data from the big global events.
They did, and the global mind, it exhibited an ERP-like response.
You're kidding.
No. When they aligned the data around the event time, they found a striking, structurally similar pattern to a typical human brain response. There was a strong positive deviation, which was preceded and followed by smaller deviations of the opposite sign.
So it's the same shape as a brain's reaction.
The same shape. Now, this pattern occurred over hours in the GCP data, not milliseconds like in a brain. But the underlying structure suggested a stimulus and response on a global scale. And that is a profound finding.
It is, because it implies that the noosphere, meets a collective mind, it processes and responds to external stimuli in a way that's analogous to a single integrated biological system.
Precisely.
So if the global mind is acting like a collective organism, does its internal state correlate with things we can measure, like external socioeconomic variables? Let's talk about that stock market volatility correlation.
This is one of the most unexpected findings. A researcher named Ulf Holmberg found that the GCP daily metric, MaxZ, which is the maximum deviation from expectation on any given day, showed a notable correlation with daily stock market returns.
And specifically?
Specifically with the S&P 500 Volatility Index, which is a measure of market sentiment, often called the fear gauge.
Why is that connection so significant? The market is supposed to be driven by rational economic forces, not quantum fields.
It suggests that the GCP data is capturing something fundamental about market sentiment, the collective anxiety or optimism of traders and the public, which then affects market behavior beyond what standard financial models can account for.
And there is something even more fascinating about the timing of this correlation.
Yes, the predictive value.
The predictive value.
The correlation was often strongest with the GCP data from the previous day.
The day before.
The day before. This suggests the collective conscious state, as captured by the GCP network, might potentially contain information that precedes or acts as a subtle precursor to one-day-ahead market movement, especially during high volatility periods. The anomalous structure seems to be forming ahead of the material manifestation of global financial sentiment.
So whether we're looking at stock market volatility or even Google search trends, which also showed correlations with the GCP data, the common thread here seems to be the synchronous movements of consciousness.
It is the common element shaping all these anomalous structures. And the field model, where consciousness is an ordering force, is far better equipped to handle these pervasive secondary correlations than the experimenter effect model, which can only really account for the 500 event boundaries.
Okay, finally, let's confirm the definitive non-locality of this, the distance and time analysis.
The findings consistently support a non-local effect. For truly global events, the pairwise correlations among devices, so how much the device in Japan syncs up with the one in the UK, do not depend on the physical distance between them.
That's the hallmark of a non-local field-like phenomenon.
It is. It's consistent with the theorized Noettic field.
But localized events, like a regional natural disaster, they did show a decline with distance.
Which is important because it proved the network is sensitive enough to register both local and global dynamics. It shows the difference between a regional group consciousness and a global collective mind. And while the strongest effects are centered precisely on the event time, some rigorous temporal analyses are suggestive of precursor changes, subtle shifts in the data happening before the event even occurs.
Which lines up perfectly with that Pierre finding, that the mind can influence future data points.
It does. It suggests the Noetic field interacts with space-time itself.
The success of GCP 1.0, with its 3 trillion to 1 odds against chance, it made it clear that the phenomenon is real. So the focus had to shift from just confirming it to understanding the physical mechanism.
Right.
And that required a massive technical overhaul, which led to GCP 2.0.
The motivation for GCP 2.0 is really twofold. First, mechanistic investigation, and second, application for global health and harmony. They're moving from just an observation experiment to a full-on physics lab, and they're using citizen science to scale up dramatically.
The scale is staggering. They're going from a network of about 70 devices to a planned network of 4,000 random number generators. How does that increase in scale help them find the physical mechanism?
Well, it increases the sensitivity and the geographical density by orders of magnitude, but the crucial technological leap is in what they're measuring.
How so?
GCP 1.0 only recorded the final conditioned random bits, the zeros and ones, after the raw signal had been cleaned up and processed. GCP 2.0 measures the raw noise coming directly out of the avalanche diodes, which is the fundamental quantum source of the randomicity.
And why is measuring that raw noise so critical?
Because the conditioning process in GCP 1.0 made it impossible to reverse engineer the precise physical interaction. By capturing the raw noise, researchers can now go backwards into the noise itself.
Let's see where the change is happening.
Exactly. They aim to capture the barest beginnings and the stages of the transition from pure quantum randomness to structure. This is designed to identify exactly where that intentional field, the nuions, is coupling with the physical device at the source level. It's an attempt to empirically validate the physics that noetic field theory suggests.
And GCP 2.0 is deployed within this larger framework, the Global Coherence Initiative, or GCI. What is the GCI investigating about the interaction between consciousness and the Earth's environment?
GCI is studying the interconnectedness between human consciousness and the Earth's magnetic and energetic field environment. The core premise is that if we're all interconnected with each other, we're probably also connected to the planet systems, particularly its electromagnetic fields and its Schumann resonances.
And they're monitoring these fields, looking for correlations with human emotional states and with the plant world.
And surprisingly, yes, with the plant world.
This was the real curveball in the source material, the Global Tree Potential Monitoring System. Why on earth are trees and plants involved in a global consciousness project?
Well, research has shown that trees and plants exhibit complex, coordinated electrical activity, and they may have senses beyond the 5 we normally think of, including sensing changes in electromagnetic fields. So the GCI is monitoring the electrical activity of multiple geographically separated trees simultaneously.
Are they looking for tree consciousness?
They're looking for group coherence in trees. The goal is to see if, when humans experience some intense, synchronous emotional outpouring like during a global peace day, or a disaster, or a mass meditation, do the trees also show a coordinated, synchronous shift in their electrical potential?
Wow. So they're looking for a biological feedback loop between us and the rest of the biosphere.
Exactly. The idea that the entire Earth system might be reacting as one single entity.
That dramatically broadens the scope of consciousness beyond just the human species. It ties back to that idea of the new sphere being an integrated layer of global intelligence that affects all life.
It does. It requires us to move past our very anthropocentric views of awareness. If trees are coordinating their activity and responding to human-driven events, it supports the idea that the noetic field is a universal ordering principle, not something limited to just human brain activity.
So the ultimate implication of all this work, both the theoretical NFT and the empirical GCP, is that physics has to fundamentally change.
Absolutely. The findings suggest that consciousness is an inherent, fundamental part of quantum systems. It's analogous to the observer effect, but scaled up and non-local. It requires the physical sciences to accommodate consciousness as a real, quantifiable force.
It's powerful empirical support.
It is. It supports the idea that individual minds have this small ability to influence random generators, and that this effect scales consistently all the way up to the level of the globe itself.
Okay, let's try to bring this enormous deep dive to a close. We started with the radical theoretical underpinning of noetic field theory, which proposes this complete physical theory of mind, quantizing consciousness into particles like noeons and grounding intentionality in a microgravitational field.
And we connected that theory to the 17-year data set of the Global Consciousness Project, which empirically confirms that global emotional events, when millions of us share synchronized, coherent attention, can structure purely random quantum data. And it does so with a statistical certainty against chance of 3 trillion to 1.
And whether we look at the persistent non-random structure, in the continuous data that the entropy analysis found, or that striking ERP-like response pattern that suggests the global mind processes stimuli like a single organism, the evidence just points so strongly towards something beyond the isolated brain.
That is the definitive conclusion. The non-local correlation across global distances, the ability to influence future data, the persistent influence on entropy. It all severely challenges the traditional materialist worldview that the brain is just a biological computer.
So whether this field is the emergent new sphere, or an extended ordering function of mind, or the information field that Nelson proposed, it demands that we redefine the relationship between mind and matter.
It does.
So here's the provocative thought for you to carry forward from this. If consciousness is indeed fundamental and interconnected, and if our shared coherent emotions can subtly introduce ordinate entropy into the quantum world, the very foundation of physical reality, what does this mean for our collective agency?
Well, if coherent attention reduces randomness, and randomness is basically synonymous with chaos and disorder,
Then we should be thinking of collective intention, which we often invoke as thoughts and prayers or focused meditation, not just as spiritual or psychological support systems, but as genuine, measurable, physical forces that might be capable of shaping global outcomes.
it changes the entire game.
It does. If we can introduce order into the quantum world through mass coherence, is it possible that achieving global coherence of intention could become one of the most powerful tools we have for addressing global problems, things like conflict or pandemics, or the massive disorder introduced by climate change? That is the real consequence of a truly conscious universe.
You've been listening to The Inner Ascent, where growth begins from within. If today's reflection resonated with you, consider sharing it or revisiting it later. Until next time, stay aware, stay curious, and keep rising.